talking to Donald L. Schoenlein at his home at Lake Lotawana, Missouri on April the 24th, 2003. Mr. Schoenlein was born on July 23, 1923, served in the military from October 26, 1942 until August 1, 1967. Mr. Schoenlein was in the 15th Air Force. He was originally in the Air Corps Army Air Corps during World War II, and subsequently in the Air Force of the United States military. In World War II, he was with the 15th Air Force, 376th Bomb Group, 575th Bomb Squadron. He was a prisoner of war for 11 months, and he holds the following medals: 3 Purple Hearts, 4 Air Medals, a POW medal, and multiple theater ribbons, and then the Presidential Citation Award for his unit. Don, where did you grow up as a kid?
I was raised in Portland, Indiana. I had my father and mother, of course, were there, and I had 2 brothers and a sister. Of course, my sister was 10 years older than I, and I was the oldest boy. So she was gone when I left. She was married and gone when I went into the service.
So, how did you happen to get in the service then?
Well, I was attending Purdue University when the war broke out. And, of course, like most young men, we thought it was the thing to do was to get in the service. I enlisted in the aviation cadets with the idea that I would be able to continue and get my degree before I graduated, or before I was called. Well, it just so happened that they were losing so many men in the Air Force or in the Air Corps during that period that I was only 3 months later, I was on a train on my way to San Antonio, Texas.
So how much schooling did you get in at Purdue then before you were nabbed?
I was in my sophomore year at Purdue when I left for the service.
I see. They kind of changed your plans on you.
Yeah, sure did.
Well, did your other brothers serve in World War II?
Yes, both of my brothers did. Both of them were in the Army Air Corps. Well, actually, my second brother was in the when it was going into the cadet program when the war ended, so he didn't do anything. My youngest brother, he served in the Air Force as when he was recalled to active duty for the Korean affair.
I see. So your parents, at one time, all 3 boys were gone to the service. Is that right?
That's right.
Did you ever ask them later? How did you feel about the 3 boys being in the service?
Well, I'm sure my mother was a very sentimental old German lady, and I don't know, Dad was always trying to be a stoic, of course, but I know my one brother told me that the first time he ever saw my dad cry was the day they heard I was shot down.
Well, do you remember the day that you told goodbye to your parents to go to the service?
Yeah, they took me to a train in Columbus, Ohio, and that train was loaded with maybe, I don't know how many, thousands of college students on their way to the aviation cadets. There are a lot of people that had enlisted under the same conditions I had, and it looked like we called them all at once.
Tearful goodbyes by a lot of people, I'm sure.
Well, shoot, I was just a kid, really. I was 18 years old. And, of course, it was kind of hard.
But you quickly made friends and went down to San Antonio to be classified.
Now, we were classified as they classified you there as navigator, bombardier, or pilot. They classified me as a bombardier, and I went on to bombardier school.
How many schools did you go to be qualified to be a bombardier?
We had to go to pre-flight, and then we went to advanced. So I was in Ellington Field, and then I went from Ellington Field to Midland, Texas, where I got my wings and got the commission.
So you were commissioned as second lieutenant upon completion of the,
As soon as I graduated, I was a second lieutenant.
then where did you go?
We went from there for phase training, what they called, and I was where our crew was formed, which was formed in Clovis, New Mexico. We were formed as a crew there. We went from there to Alamogordo as second phase training. Then we went to third phase training in Charleston, South Carolina, and from there we went to Mitchell Field and overseas.
So there were, your crew of 10 was formed, and then you spent a lot of time then with those 10 fellas.
That's correct.
Before you went overseas, so you got to know them well.
Yes, the very sad part of it is I lost them.
Yes, yes. Well, that certainly would be. That certainly would be. See, so you trained for the better part of a year. And so when did you find it? When did you leave
We were,
for
started
Italy?
flying overseas in January of '44. We took the southern route. We took out our airplane. We picked up a new airplane in New York on Long Island, Mitchell Field.
That was a B-24.
B-24. We took it, flew the southern route. We finally took it to San Pancrazio, Italy. Of course, when we landed there, they took the airplane away from us and gave it to put us in another group, and we were put in the 515th Squadron, and our airplane went into I think the 512th Squadron.
So did you start flying missions right away?
We flew through, I had a real queer experience. We started flying our missions. For first ones, they take you, members of the crew, and put them with an experienced crew. Well, my first mission, I flew with an experienced crew, and I'd been used to flying in airplanes of a little different than the 24s we had over there.
About
on this first mission, I just pitched my chute up in the nose of the aircraft like we always had. Well, not knowing that newer models didn't have a little ledge there. They had a plywood floor in there. And when that airplane took off, my chute slid out the nose wheel doors. So I went on my first mission without a parachute. And of course the navigator said, "Now look, we'll jump together. You can both, we had chest packs, we can hook onto the same chute, and we'll both jump together." Well, fortunately nothing much happened that mission, and when I got back, somebody met me at the barracks and said, "The colonel likes to see you." So I went up there and he said, "Son, that's a dangerous thing to go. We found this at the end of the runway." And it was my parachute. And then we flew the rest of our missions as a crew. Our co-pilot got sick and he was out for a little while, but he came back to us, and our tail gunner got frostbite so bad, and he stayed with it. He ended up, tail gunner, he ended up getting the Silver Star, by the way. And but the day we went down as a crew.
Well, Don, tell me about it was, you went down on the 41st mission, so, I mean, they probably gave you like you said, a few easy missions at the beginning, but then you got into the hard stuff. What was a typical mission like, mission 12 or mission 15 or mission 20?
Well, most of our missions were anywhere from 10 to 12 hours long. They were long missions, and we flew at altitude. But we were young kids. We could hold up. We didn't bother us that much. We were scared, but I think we were more frightened of showing our fright than it was of actually getting hurt or killed.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the missions, we ended up getting shot up pretty bad a couple of times. I got a Purple Heart on a mission, and I can't remember the date, but I got shrapnel in my left leg on that mission. I think one of the other guys got shrapnel on that same mission. That's where I got my first Purple Heart. My second Purple Heart, second and third Purple Heart, I got on the day I was shot down.
Well, Don, if you were flying these missions, and I mean, every day was flak and probably fighter pilots and at the time, if you flew 50, you got to come home. Did you guys, I mean, not a lot of people even made it to 41. So what was your feeling about being able to make the 50?
We really thought that we thought we had it made, truthfully. With the war, and you know, this was on the 16th of June, D-Day had happened, and we thought that they'd also started the thing in France, and we thought, boy, we've got it made, but probably from now on it won't be so bad. Well, it didn't end up quite that way, but...
Where were most of these missions being flown to?
Well, we flew into Bulgaria, Romania, northern Italy, Austria, Hungary, southern Germany, France.
Is there any one of them that was more eventful that you remember well before the day you got shot down?
Well, I remember we made one Budapest raid on Budapest, and during the raid, it was a bad day, and one of the groups came in on top of us, over the top of us, and just started dropping their bombs right through us, and we could look right out and see these bombs falling all around us, which scared the dickens out of us. And then, of course, we'd lost a couple engines that day coming home from flak, so we came home on 2 engines. Fortunately, they were outboard or they had the inboard engine that had the hydraulics on it and the outboard engine on the other side, so we were in pretty good shape. The airplane flies, well, not like a bird, but it makes it on 2 engines.
Mm-hmm. Now, as a bombardier, did you have to be intense on the whole mission, or just maybe 100 miles from the target you started getting your mind right, or how did that work?
The worst part of it was we didn't really have anything to do till we got right on. So we started on the initial point, and we started to go in on the bomb run. That's the only time that we were really involved in the thing. The old D's did have 50 caliber machine guns up there for the bombardier and navigator, but I was flying in a G model that day, and we had a nose turret.
Mm-hmm.
So there was nothing really for me to do until we got there.
And how long did let's say, a bombing run take? I mean, for the bombardier, how long was he actively busy on a bombing run?
Boy, that's a tough question. I can't really answer that, I don't think. They varied once you hit your initial point. Of course, originally we used the bomb sight and bombed separately. Then we started getting what they call Mickey ships. And that was a ship with a big radar dome underneath it. And then the bombardier got to be nothing but a toggle master. He just, as soon as he saw the bombs in the plane in front of you, you hit the toggle switch and sent your bomb. So you really didn't need the bomb sight after they started flying with those ships.
Hmm. And how long did it take you to release all your bombs? 30 seconds? A minute?
They went out right away.
How many bombs were you carrying?
Well, we carried 500s, and if I remember correctly, we carried 8 500s, or we carried 4,000 pounders, and then we carried a whole rack full of incendiaries every now and then. The only thing is, those incendiaries, when they'd release in that bomb bay, you could hear them banging around in there before they got out.
Yeah.
Well, the old 24 had a bomb bay that was like an old roll-top desk, drawers. And of course, back in the States, if you didn't get your bomb bays open, you couldn't the bombs wouldn't drop. Well, overseas, they took the safeties off. So the guys, every now and then, when the guys get his doors, couldn't get it open, he dropped these bombs right through the doors. And you'd see them coming back, these doors flapping.
Well, what happened on your 41st mission?
We were crashed by an ME-410. My top turret gunner, I heard him say, "Watch that SOB at 12 o'clock." And then there was a horrid noise. Well, when that 410 came in, fortunately for me, he peeled that daggone nose right off. And when the wing went off and the plane left off the left, I was just standing there in the wide open spaces, and all I did was just pull myself out.
Now, was he deliberate? He wasn't deliberately
No,
ramming you, was he? He was.
No, he
just
was.
poor
It was.
flying.
He was dead. Or was probably. What happened later on this, and I got a little bit of information about this in later years. I was one of my bomb group meetings, reunions, and we sat down and started to talk. And I was talking to a young fella my age, and he said, "Well, I was in the 515th." I said, "Well, so was I." He said, we got talking. He said, I shot down an ME-410, but I never got credit for it because it crashed into another B-24. And so they didn't give me credit for it. So that's how I learned who actually shot me down was a nose gunner of the lead crew of that day.
So the obviously the German plane was out of control. The pilot was probably dead. Had to go somewhere. It hit you.
And since the war, I have heard from a Czechoslovakian or a Slovakian who sent me the names of the 2 German Unteroffiziers that were on this airplane and the tail number of their airplane.
Okay, so it hits you, not quite dead on, but it takes out the front of the plane and one wing, and then what happened?
Well, of course, I pulled myself out, and the plane, of course, went down. And
Where were you in the plane?
I was in the nose.
You were in the nose, so.
Yeah. So what I did, just peeled it right off above me, and it went in the flight deck and immediately killed the pilot and the co-pilot. And when I got out, I went down in my chute. I did have a German airplane come by and wiggle his wings at me while I was on the way down. I landed in a cornfield in near Komárom, Hungary, and I had my left hand had already been wounded from shrapnel, and I broke both ankles when I hit the ground. I was captured immediately by a bunch of farmers. Shortly thereafter, Hungarian army came around in a truck, and they took me around to some of the aircraft that were down in the area, including my own aircraft, which I did see it on the ground. Then I was taken to a little field, or a little artillery camp in Komárom, Hungary, where I was kept in the officers' quarters with a guard on the door, but I slept with the Hungarian officers. But they did have a guard on the door at night.
Don, before we continue on that part, did any of your crew get out of the plane but you?
I was the only one that survived.
And you wouldn't if he had not been in the nose, and all of a sudden you're in the open.
Yeah. That's the only way I got out. I was a sole survivor of that crew.
Do you have any idea what your altitude was when...
We were at probably 26 or 7,000.
Had you already made the bomb run?
We were on the bomb run. We had just turned on the initial point, and we were on our way in on the run. We still had our bombs when we went down. We hadn't dropped our bombs.
So how about oxygen? I mean, you had to be on oxygen. Did you lose that when you bailed out?
Oh yeah, I lost my oxygen, I lost my helmet. I had a helmet on and a flak vest when I went out. But when I got out, I didn't have my flak vest or my helmet on. And
Did you black out going down?
No, I didn't think the chute was going to open. I really didn't. Probably was a matter of seconds, but I was just getting ready to rip it open when it popped out. It was a matter of seconds. It seemed a long time to me, I think. I never knew what I did with the D-ring. When I pulled that D-ring, I must have flung it someplace.
But it was unusual, as high as you were flying, isn't it, that you didn't black out because of oxygen?
No, I don't know how far I fell before I actually opened it. But you can breathe for a short period of time at that altitude without oxygen. And of course, we never put oxygen on except at night until 10,000 feet. Once you're at 10,000 feet, you were all right.
So the Hungarians picked you up and you slept with the Hungarian officers.
That's right. it took them several days before they could get enough of a priority for gasoline to take me to Budapest. And
Did you get any medical treatment while you were waiting?
they wrapped my ankles with paper and put paper bandages on my hands. They didn't have cloth bandages, I guess. And of course, I can remember the commander's name was Tibor Bank. He was a full colonel. And Alexander Hohenlohe of the Hohenlohes was a Zaslos, which was their equivalent of our second lieutenant. And those two officers, and there was another officer there that corresponded with my family after the war. And of course, I have a godson in Hungary. They named me the godfather of this boy in Hungary, but that all quit when the Russians came in, and because we didn't want to get involved with.
Did they show you any respect?
They treated me very well while I was there. They finally got enough of a priority to get enough gasoline to drive me to Budapest. When I was in Budapest, I rode in the back of an open truck with 2 Hungarian guards. And one Hungarian guard put his overcoat over my uniform and told me in English that he'd like to have me see the beautiful city of Budapest. So they took me for a little trip around Budapest. I went across the bridge from Buda to Pest, and you could see that they showed me different things. He thought that the place it was beautiful, except for the Germans standing around on the bridge with their anti-aircraft guns and so on and so forth. But when they took me then, they turned me over to the Germans. The Germans put me in a cell in a regular prison. It was just like a prison. A single room, probably not as big as this room. And I was there for 31 days in solitary confinement. All we got was soup in the morning, soup in the afternoon, and soup in the evening, and they brought us 1 loaf of bread.
When you say us, who else was there?
Well, I was the only one in that room, but there were others in the prison, I found out later.
Americans, Brits?
American and British. After 31 days I was interrogated. Well, I was interrogated earlier, but I was re-interrogated after 31 days. And both of the German officers spoke English, actually better English than I spoke. And one of them had said he had run a ski school in Gramercy Park in New York City before he came back to Germany. But they finally put us on a train. There were 26 of us from Budapest back up to Stalag Luft 3 in Germany. And there were, if I remember, there were 6 or 7 Americans and the rest were British officers. And they assigned us 2 German guards. And these German guards were, they brought us some old hard bread and some ersatz jelly, jam. And we had a very decent trip back because these 2 guards were so glad to get back to Germany after having been on the Eastern Front. They even ran in one place and got a little bread for us one time because our bread was so bad it was moldy, and I never got so much heartburn in my life from eating that moldy bread.
So, how long was the trip from Budapest to the
We must have been
camp?
about 2 days. About 2 days.
Was it a big long train? Did you get?
Well, you know, I didn't see the rest of the train.
Yes.
We were in a boxcar. And,
Did you get strafed at all by?
No. Of course, see, we left Budapest, and we went up to Sagen, which was midway between Breslau and Berlin. Actually, it's in Poland today.
What was the date you got shot down, Don?
16th of June, 1944.
Okay, so this would have been probably in the late summer or the early
Yeah,
fall.
I got to Stalag through after July the 4th sometime. I know it was after July the 4th.
Mm-hmm. Had you gotten any treatment in Budapest for your ankles?
No, they had just left me like I was. And of course, I had palliass, the straw mattress we were on, was so full of sand fleas or whatever it was, my wrists and my ankles were just as if were raw from me digging at them, I guess.
They eventually healed with no...
Yeah, they healed all right. I still have a disability on my ankles and on my knees. I limp a little bit. Of course, part of that's old age.
Yeah. So in July then you went to the camp. Is that how was life in the camp?
Well, this was one of the better Luftwaffe camps. It really was one of the best. It was kind of one of Hermann Göring's show-off camps, which I was very fortunate to get into. It's the same camp that you interviewed Bob, and he was there. He got there in '42. I didn't get there till '44. He was an old timer when I got there, because but the camp was not bad. We had it was well organized. The British had trained a lot of our people, the older ones, and then they helped train us into how to get along and what to do with what we had. So we were in pretty good shape.
Did you? How was the food and?
Well, the food was
sparse, was it?
The German food we didn't get much because the Germans didn't have much, but we did get Red Cross parcels part of the time. And of course, my daughter has it now. I have a book full of the Kriege recipes of how we took Canadian crackers and stuff like that and made puddings and we made food and made everything go. In other words, we had what we call combines. We had 8 officers in my room, and we combined all our food and everything. Everything was combined. And then we had a guy that took turns cooking and 2 guys that worked as helpers. And so that changed after a week. One guy cooked for a week, then 2 guys helped. And that's how and so we ate fairly well, considering.
Mm-hmm.
If it hadn't been for the American Red Cross parcels, we wouldn't have.
Mm-hmm. And I expect the German guards, if it hadn't been for the Red Cross parcels, they wouldn't have gotten along either.
No. In fact, I guess when we took off in January, when they fought the forced march, they found a warehouse absolutely loaded with Red Cross parcels when we were not getting our parcels.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So did you make some pretty good friends there? How many of you were in this combined group of 8?
Yeah, I met most of them, but you know, after the war, it seemed like everybody went their own way. We're from all over the country, and I went to Chicago one time to visit one of the guys when he lived in Chicago, which was close. But most of the rest of them, I really never saw them much after we got out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I guess that's just the way it is. How about the cold winter of '44?
That was a dibble because the Russians got too close to our camp in January of 1944.
45.
45, yeah, January of '45, and they moved us, and it was pretty bad in January of '45. We had a march. We marched to Spremberg in the snow, and I happened in the car. Bob got me the copy of the march. One of the guys from the West compound kept a day-by-day thing of the march, and I had forgotten how many days we were on the march. I'd forgotten all the stops we made. I do know that Spremberg we finally were put in boxcars, which was probably is worse than walking in the snow and freezing, because there was no way to go to the bathroom, there was no place to do anything, and you couldn't sit down. The boxcar was so crowded, you were jammed in there so thick. And of course guys were sick and going to the bathroom, had diarrhea, and the place smelled like holy heck. And I think we were 3 days in that boxcar, if I'm not mistaken.
No food, no water.
They brought us food on one stop. And they did stop one time and let us get out to go to the bathroom. And of course the guards were old, and but they all had dogs. I understand a couple of guys maybe did escape during that train trip. I don't know. I can't verify that. But
How far do you think you were from the lines at that time? How far were the Allies, either the Russians or the
the Russians,
Americans?
I guess we could hear the guns in the distance. They were getting pretty close to us. We then went to what they called a Stalag 7A in Moosburg, Germany. There was a place that was built for 1,000 prisoners, and when they started moving us all in there were 10,000 prisoners there in that camp. So you can imagine how the living conditions were there, with a camp for 1,000 with 10,000 in it.
What happened, Don, if a guy got sick, and I'm sure there were many people who did, malnutrition, just colds, flu, pneumonia?
Well, we had a guy that was, when I was in the prison in Stalag 3, we called him Doc. He was a pre-med student. And the Germans did give him certain things to take care of sicknesses and illnesses. If anybody was seriously bad, they did have a place to send them. Fortunately, most of us were young and healthy, really. We were all in pretty good shape. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. A few of them, we had a friend of one of the guys in my barracks. His name was Steve Fleener. When he was shot down, or landed, or however, the Achilles tendon in his foot was severed. And of course he can't, to walk, his foot had flopped. Well, the Germans did repatriate him.
So this went on for how long? How long were you at Moosburg?
Well, we got to Moosburg, must have got there in February. We were there when Roosevelt died. He
died April the 12th, 45.
So we'd been there a while, because I imagine that the whole trek from where we were in Poland to where we got north of Munich there was probably 10 days or so, I would guess. At least 10 days. So I was there from, I guess, February sometime until the day we were liberated, which was April 29th, I think, was the date.
Mm-hmm. How were you liberated?
There was a small battle outside the camp. I've heard later that it wasn't such a small battle, it was a pretty good-sized battle. And there was a white old steeple that we could see from the camp, church steeple, and you should have heard the noise when they saw the American flag go up.
So you're liberated by the Americans?
We were liberated by the 14th Armored Division. 14th Armored Division of the 3rd Army.
Do you remember the first American GI you saw that came into the camp?
Not really. I really don't. We did. One of them was, of course, was a little guy named Patton. He came in. I have some pictures someplace of Patton as he came onto the camp. I think he had General Lee with him when he came.
He make a little speech, did he?
Oh yeah, he gave a little speech. Then they took us and they put us in a deloused us, put us in, sprayed that junk all over us. We got our first white bread we'd seen in God knows how long. Guys ate that white bread till some of them got real sick. And then they loaded us on trucks. They took us to an airfield, and I used to know the name of that airfield, but I've forgotten it. And they loaded us on C-47s. They took us from there to Camp Lucky Strike. Camp Lucky Strike, we got as much medical treatment as we needed, and we were there probably for a week. We got fed. They watched our diet a little bit, and we were fed there. We were given new uniforms and paid, and then they took us to, trucked us to the port, and when we got on a boat and we came home, I can remember it was a USS Kungsholm was the name of the ship I came home on. But honest to goodness, I cannot remember a thing about that trip home. I must have been euphoric or something. I can't. A lot of the guys can tell me about their trip home in the boat. I can't. I can't even remember. I do remember landing in New York and calling my wife. And
Now, when have you been married?
well, if my first wife, if I was still married to her, we'd have, July the 3rd, this year, we'd have been married for 60 years.
So you married her when you were in bomb
I
school?
married her just before I graduated. I had to get permission from my commanding officer. We were married in the First Methodist Church in Midland, Texas. Unfortunately, the marriage only lasted 25 years, but it was a good marriage.
Where did she stay while you were gone?
She stayed with her parents.
She was a Texas girl?
No, she had to go back to Indiana and stay with her parents back in Portland, Indiana.
What, you ask her later, I'm sure, what notification did your next of kin, namely your wife, get when you were captured?
My daughter has the telegram. It said, I forget exactly how it read, but I remember General Ulio signed it, and they did get a letter later stating that they didn't figure that there was much hope because there was only one chute seen coming out of the airplane. My daughter has the telegrams. She has everything. She has a whole business over there. A little log I kept when I was in the prison camp and everything. My daughter still has that.
That couldn't have been very hopeful when they get a telegram that says you're missing in action and only one guy was seen. Ooh.
Yeah. But it was me.
Yeah, it was you, and you're here to tell about it today.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. So you called your wife, and then you probably got some leave, and
I had 90 days leave coming, and they sent us then for 30 days to Florida. And while we were in Florida, the war ended. And I thought, well, I better get out and get to work, because if I don't, all these other guys are going to get all the jobs. So I went back to Camp Atterbury, Indiana, and got out of the service. But I stayed in the reserves.
okay, you got out in 46?
46. I stayed in the reserves. I didn't get recalled again to active duty, actually, until 1961. I had been to command and staff school and a few other schools.
So they missed the Korean War. They didn't call you back in Korea.
I missed the Korean War completely. They called me back at 61. In October of 61, I was called back to active duty. And let's see, within 15 days, I was on an airplane opening up a base in France as a base supply officer of a base that had been closed. And we were reopening it for our tactical fighter wing. I was a member at that time of the 122nd Tactical Fighter Wing. And in the United States, it was a 122nd Tactical Fighter Wing. Well, when we landed overseas, they redesignated us as a 7122nd Tactical Fighter Wing. And I was there for a year, and
That was during the Cold War?
During the Cold War, during the Berlin Wall crisis. We were flying every day. We had planes flying every day, right up against the Russians and back every day. At that time, I had been promoted to staff supply officer for the wing, and so I got to set in on the command things every time we were set up there in the.
So how long were you in France then?
I was in France a year. And I came back in 1962. Went back in the reserves, stayed in the reserves until it looked like I might have going to end up in Vietnam. And I said, well, it's time for this old man to fold up his tent and go away.
So that's what you did
I retired.
In 67 of April.
Retired in 67.
But you had 25 years.
Almost 25, 24 years plus.
When you look back on your POW experiences. You were in the hands of the Germans and the Hungarians for 11 months. Any one big thought just kind of come out and jump at you about that experience?
Well, the worst part of it is you have nothing, no control over yourself. There's no way that you can make a decision that I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that. You're in behind that barbed wire and there you stay. And I used to console myself by saying, well, this can't be much worse than being stationed someplace up in Alaska where I can't get out, can't go home, or can't do anything. And that's how I used to satisfy myself.
So you talk to yourself.
Yeah.
Do you think everybody was able to deal with it in that way?
Most all of them did. We had a few, I think they had a few cases, guys that went bonkers, but not too many.
Mm-hmm.
But remember, this was an Air Force officers' camp. And most of these guys were educated, very fine shape, and they were kind of the cream of the crop when you get right down to it. So they were in pretty good shape.
Mm-hmm. Did you get a chance to finish your schooling?
Well, after the war, I went back. I didn't go back to Purdue University. My wife's father had a jewelry store. So I went to Bradley University in Peoria, Illinois. And I studied watchmaking and jewelry and a lot of stuff. I finally went on to correspondence and became a graduate gemologist with the American Gem Society and a certified gemologist with the Gemological Institute of America. And I stayed there, and then my wife and I had our falling out. We'd been married 25 years. I then was remarried, and of course I didn't stay with my father-in-law's business. I went to California. I went to work for Slavik's Jewelry Company, which was the guild division of the Zale Corporation, the fine jewelry division. And I started out as a manager. Eventually I became a district manager, and I had 5 stores in Southern California. I worked out of the main store in downtown Los Angeles.
And so really you had a long military career, and your post-military career has been as a gemologist in the jewelry business. So when did you finally retire?
I retired in 1986.
Well, if you're an Indiana boy that was out in California, how'd you get to Kansas City, Missouri area?
Well, my oldest daughter from my first marriage married a Missouri boy. And they both lived out here in the Kansas City area. They lived in Green Valley and Blue Springs. Finally, about 20 years ago, they bought a house on Lake Lotawana. Well, after my second wife died, they said, "Dad, you're getting too damned old to stay out there in California. We can't take care of you if anything happens, and we can't do anything. So we want you to move back here." So I bought this place here on the lake and moved lock, stock, and barrel back to Kansas City. And I enjoy it back here. I kind of miss my California winters. But I lived in California 29 years.
Southern California?
Yeah.
Well, it didn't take as long to get anywhere in your car around here.
No. No, I used to get a kick out of it. My daughter would say something about, "Well, you don't want to drive today during these hours because the traffic's real heavy." And I said,
yeah.
a lot of difference.
Till you've done the 405 or something, you don't know traffic.
I did I traveled all over. I had a store in Century City. I had a store in Santa Barbara. I had a store in Culver City, and one in Northridge. And
downtown L.A.
And I worked out of downtown L.A. And I drove in from Orange County into downtown L.A. every day.
Well, you had a great military career. You certainly had your bumps while you were flying as a bombardier in the Air Corps. But you had a great military career and a great civilian career. Now you're retired. How about your family? Tell me what family you have.
Okay, well, my oldest daughter died when she was 21. My number 2 daughter, whose name is Connie, is married to Don Levin, and they live just around the cove here, just around in the next cove over there. They had, between them, they had 6 children, so I have 6 grandchildren. From the grandkids have produced 7 great-grandkids, so I have quite a family here. Plus my daughter from a second marriage is living here with me.
Well, you do have a great family, and one that with all those grandkids is going to keep getting more and more children in the future. Well, you've had a great career. Any last thoughts, Don, that you might have about going to serve, being asked to serve, serving your country? Because you did spend 25 years at it.
Were I able, I'd love to be able to do it again. I really would. I'm not able anymore, but gee, I watch these airplanes today. It'd kill me just to spend some time and when they try to make a few sachets around. But I'm still very proud. I have a uniform. I will put on a uniform, and I'll wear a uniform on Memorial Day.
Well, your country's proud of you. You did the job for your country, Don. Thank you very much.
Uh-huh.